Ancient Judah was a land of echoes, where the whispers of prophets fought the screams of idols. Under a blood-red moon, the golden age of David began to fracture, not from war, but from a chilling compromise. The air once holy now reeked of iron and betrayal. How could a king sworn to the heavens barter his divine soul for a hollow peace with a pagan queen? As the massive cedar doors of the great hall groaned open for a cursed banquet, the court erupted in revelry, cheering for their own impending destruction. But hidden behind the heavy tapestries stood Azubah, known only as the Abandoned One. In the amber flicker of the torches, she saw what the drunken nobles missed: the lethal shimmer of a poisoned cup. She held a truth dangerous enough to burn the throne to ashes or save a nation from the brink. The clock was ticking, and the night the wine turned to venom. Judah's destiny was changed forever. The great hall of Jerusalem was a sea of gold and depravity. As King Jehoshaphat raised the ceremonial chalice to seal a blood pact with the pagan ambassadors, the air grew thick with a sense of impending doom. While the nobles cheered, blinded by wine, Azubah stepped from the shadows. She didn't scream. She acted. With a swift, calculated movement, she struck the golden cup from the king's hand. The wine, laced with the tasteless, paralyzing venom, shattered across the marble floor, hissing like a serpent. Silence fell over the court, heavy and terrifying. Azubah looked into the eyes of the man she loved and saw only a stranger consumed by political greed. For this one act of defiance, for shaming the king in front of his new idols, she was not killed but erased. Stripped of her silk robes and her name, she was dragged to the Pit of Whispers, a forgotten dungeon beneath the palace foundations. Her captors thought the darkness would break her, but they underestimated the strength of a soul anchored in truth. In the absolute silence of her cell, Azubah realized that a crown can be taken, but a mission cannot. She began to use the very isolation intended to destroy her as a weapon. She noticed that the palace floorboards above her head acted like a drum, carrying the vibrations of every secret conversation, every whispered plot of the queen's spies. Azubah began to recruit the invisible ones, the broken-hearted servants who brought her meager rations. Using a sharpened fishbone and the juice of crushed berries found in her scraps, she began to write. She didn't write letters of lament. She wrote codes of resistance. She taught the servant girls how to recognize the patterns of betrayal in the queen's court. Through a network of laundresses, her blood-inked scrolls began to circulate secretly among the faithful remnant of Judah. Each scrap of parchment was a candle lit in a darkening nation. The abandoned queen had become the unseen general of a spiritual war, and the palace walls were no longer a prison, but her headquarters for a revolution that the king never saw coming. The Pit of Whispers was no longer a tomb. It had become a fortress of the mind. But the growing silence among the palace servants did not go unnoticed. Queen Athaliah, the daughter of Jezebel, possessed a soul sharpened by malice and an intuition fed by dark spirits. She felt the shift in the palace air, a strange quiet dignity in the slaves, a lingering gaze in the guards. She knew the source of this infection was the woman rotting in the cellar. One night, accompanied only by two silent executioners, Athaliah descended into the damp darkness to confront the ghost of the dungeon. The confrontation was a clash of two worlds. Athaliah stood in the torchlight, draped in Tyrian purple and smelling of expensive myrrh, while Azubah sat in the shadows, her rags stained with the very ink she used for her secret scrolls. Athaliah did not come with blades. She came with psychological venom. She threw a handful of gold coins at Azubah's feet, mocking her poverty. "Your God is a memory, Azubah," she hissed, her voice like silk over a dagger. "Your husband bows to my gods, and your son Jehoram is learning to love the taste of power more than the smell of your scrolls. Why suffer for a dead tradition?" But Azubah did not flinch. She looked past the queen's jewels and saw the hollow fear in her eyes. "Power is a shadow that vanishes when the sun sets." "Athaliah," Azubah replied, her voice steady, despite months of silence. "But truth is the rock that remains when the tide goes out." Enraged by this defiance, Athaliah ordered the guards to bring in a cage of vipers, threatening to let them loose in the cell if Azubah did not reveal the names of her secret messengers. It was a moment of supreme tension. The snakes hissed, sensing the coldness of the room. Yet Azubah closed her eyes and began to recite the ancient psalms aloud. The spiritual weight of her words seemed to fill the cramped space, creating an invisible barrier. In a sudden, unexplainable twist of fate, a heavy stone from the ceiling, loosened by years of decay, shook loose and crashed between them, narrowly missing Athalia, but shattering the cage of vipers. In the chaos, the queen recoiled in terror, convinced that Azubah possessed a dark magic of her own. Athalia fled back to the surface, leaving Azubah in darkness, but the queen's fear had been ignited. Azubah realized that her greatest weapon wasn't the ink on her scrolls, but the paralyzing fear that truth strikes into the hearts of tyrants. The battle lines were no longer just on parchment. They were etched in the very soul of the palace. The atmosphere in Jerusalem had reached a boiling point. Furious from her encounter in the dungeon, Athalia declared a purification of the palace. She realized that as long as Azubah's writings existed, the hearts of the people would never fully belong to her dark gods. She ordered a brutal room-to-room search, commanded by her elite guard, to find every scrap of parchment, every stitched garment, and every coded message. "Burn the words," she screamed, "and the woman will die with them." This was the Great Purge, a night of fire and terror intended to wipe Azubah's legacy from the face of the earth. But Azubah, warned by the subtle vibration of the floorboards above, had already initiated the Great Forgery. In the weeks leading up to the raid, she had instructed her network of light to create hundreds of fake scrolls. These decoys were filled with meaningless poems, laundry lists, and mundane court gossip, but written in a way that mimicked her sacred coding. While the guards tore through the servant quarters, the faithful riskily swapped the true scrolls for these clever imitations. The air in the courtyard soon filled with the smoke of burning parchment, as Athalia watched, laughing, believing she was incinerating the truth. The real drama, however, took place in the shadows of the temple's inner sanctum. Azubah knew that even the dungeon was no longer safe. She entrusted the Master Scroll, the complete record of God's law, and the secret history of Judah to a young, terrified priest named Jehoiada. Under the cover of the Great Purge's chaos, they had to move the scroll from the palace to the temple. It was a suicide mission. As the guards moved toward the dungeon, Azubah used a hidden lever, a relic of an ancient escape tunnel, to pass the scroll through a narrow crevice in the stone wall. Outside, a decoy runner was caught and executed on the spot, drawing the guards' attention away from the temple's side entrance. Inside her cell, Azubah sat calmly as the soldiers finally burst in. They found her empty-handed, sitting amidst piles of blank, discarded scraps. They tore her room apart, ripping the straw from her bed, but found nothing. They didn't realize that the very pillars of the temple now held the soul of the nation. The scrolls were gone, sealed behind the reredos of the Holy of Holies. Athalia thought she had won a victory of fire, but Azubah had won a victory of stone. The truth was no longer a wandering whisper. It was an anchored foundation, waiting for a future king to rediscover it. As the years passed, the corruption in Jerusalem crystallized into a reign of terror. Jehoram, Azubah's only son, had fully ascended the throne, but he was a king in name only. His soul had been hollowed out by Athalia's whispers and the intoxicating lure of absolute power. He had done the unthinkable to secure his crown. He executed all 6 of his younger brothers, the very children Azubah had tried to shield with her prayers. But Jehoram's paranoia was a starving beast that could never be satisfied. He became obsessed with the ghost in the cellar, convinced by Athalia that his mother wasn't just a prisoner, but a sorceress holding a secret golden code that could spark a coup. The son became the hunter. Jehoram ordered the total blockade of the palace dungeons. No food, no light, and no human contact were permitted to reach Azubah. He personally patrolled the corridors above her head, his heavy boots sounding like thunder to the woman below. One night, fueled by a feverish madness and the growing symptoms of an incurable intestinal disease, Jehoram descended into the pit alone. He didn't come for a blessing. He came with a dagger demanding the golden code he believed she had hidden from him. The scene was heartbreaking. A son bloated with sin and sickness towering over a mother who looked like a skeleton draped in rags. "Where is it, mother?" he roared, his voice cracking with desperation. "Where is the scroll that turns the servants against me? Give it to me, or I will burn this entire foundation to ash." Azubah looked up at him, her eyes filled not with fear, but with a devastating maternal pity. She didn't reach for a weapon. She reached for his hand, the same hand she had held when he was a toddler learning to walk. "The code you seek is not written in gold, Jehoram," she whispered, her voice rasping from years of thirst. "It is written in the blood of the brothers you murdered. It is the law you trampled." Jehoram recoiled as if struck. The darkness in the room seemed to press in on him, haunted by the memory of her voice teaching him the ancient psalms. For a fleeting second, the hunter's mask slipped, revealing a terrified boy. But the darkness was too deep. He spat at her feet and swore that if he couldn't have the secret, he would ensure she rotted in silence until the end of time. He sealed the iron door with his own royal signet, unaware that his mother's pity was a heavier sentence than any dungeon. The judgment that Azubah had long foreseen finally arrived, not with fire from the sky, but with a slow, agonizing rot from within. King Jehoram's illness had become a grotesque spectacle. His bowels were literally wasting away, a physical manifestation of his decaying soul. As he lay on his gilded bed, surrounded by the hollow comforts of his pagan priests, the silence of the palace became deafening. In his delirium, the only thing he could hear was the scratching of his mother's pen from the dungeon below. Driven by an unbearable weight of guilt, Jehoram committed one final clandestine act. He ordered his most trusted servant, a man who was secretly part of Azubah's network of light, to bring his mother to his bedside in the dead of night. When Azubah was brought into the royal chambers, the contrast was staggering. The king was dying amidst silk and gold, yet he was a pauper in spirit. Azubah, skeletal and blinded by years of darkness, possessed a radiance that filled the room. Jehoram reached out his hands, trembling, and pulled a hidden object from beneath his pillow. It was the original scroll Azubah had written for him when he was a boy, now stained with his own blood from his coughing fits. "I could not burn it, mother," he gasped, his eyes pleading for a forgiveness he didn't believe he deserved. "Every time I tried, the letters scorched my hands." In that final desperate hour, Azubah did not condemn him. She sat by the man who had imprisoned her and began to write one last time. Since the ink had long since dried, she pricked her own finger and used her blood to finish the broken sentences on the scroll. She wrote of the unseen king, who would rise from the ashes of David's house. She told Jehoram that while his reign was ending in shame, the lineage would survive through a hidden spark. Just before he drew his last breath, Jehoram handed the bleeding scroll to the high priest, Jehoiada, who had entered the room in secret. "Protect the child," Jehoram whispered, referring to his grandson, Joash, whom he knew Athaliah would eventually target. As the king's eyes clouded over, Azubah leaned in and whispered the ancient blessing she had taught him as a child. Jehoram died in the arms of the mother he had hunted, and the bleeding scroll was smuggled out of the palace just moments before Athaliah's guards burst in to claim the throne. The physical scrolls were few, but they were now saturated with a mother's sacrifice ready to guide the next generation through the fire. The death of Jehoram ignited a bloodlust in Queen Athaliah that Jerusalem had never seen. To secure her absolute rule, she issued a decree of total extermination. Every male descendant of the house of David was to be slaughtered by dawn. The palace became a slaughterhouse, echoing with the clash of steel and the cries of the innocent. But Athaliah had forgotten one thing, the woman she had left for dead in the bowels of the earth. Azubah, guided by a strength that defied her frail body, moved through the secret veins of the palace tunnels, known only to the builders and the abandoned one. As the assassins breached the royal nursery, Azubah emerged from a hidden panel behind a tapestry. She didn't carry a sword, but she possessed the terrifying calm of a martyr. While Princess Jehosheba grabbed the infant Joash, Azubah orchestrated the ultimate distraction. She gathered the discarded royal blankets and bundled them into the shape of a child. As the heavy boots of the killers thundered down the hallway, Azubah stood in the center of the room, her back to the secret door, where the real prince was being whisked away. The door burst open. The lead assassin, eyes red with madness, lunged toward the bundle in Azubah's arms. In that split second, Azubah took a brutal blade to her shoulder to shield the decoy. She didn't scream. Her silence was more powerful than their violence. While the killers focused on her and the fake prince, the real Joash reached the safety of the temple's underground vaults. Bleeding and exhausted, Azubah used her final strength to collapse against the secret lever locking the stone door from the outside and breaking the mechanism. She had trapped herself with the wolves to ensure the lamb could escape. As the fires of the purge lit up the night sky, Azubah lay in the red-stained straw, a small triumphant smile on her lips. She had traded her life for the future of a kingdom. 6 years passed in a heavy, suffocating silence. Queen Athaliah ruled Judah with an iron fist, unaware that beneath the very stones of the temple, a secret was breathing. Joash, the boy, saved by a grandmother's sacrifice, grew up in the shadows of the Holy of Holies. His only teacher was the voice of the high priest Jehoiada, and his only textbooks were the blood-ink scrolls that Azubah had bled to protect. On the morning of the 7th year, the silence finally broke. The silver trumpets of the Levites shattered the air, and the people of Jerusalem gathered to witness a miracle. As the 7-year-old Joash stood by the royal pillar crowned and holding the sacred law, Athaliah rushed into the temple screaming, "Treason, treason!" But the soldiers, moved by the sight of the true heir and the words of the scrolls now read aloud to the masses, did not move to help her. They saw in Joash not just a child, but the living legacy of Azubah. Athaliah was dragged away, her reign of darkness, ending exactly where Azubah's suffering had begun, at the palace gates. But the greatest moment of the day was not the execution of a tyrant. It was the revelation of the truth. Jehoiada led the young king to the base of a massive, unmovable pillar in the temple courtyard. As the stone was pried open, it revealed the resting place of Azubah's final writings. There they found the master scrolls preserved perfectly against the rot of time. The people wept as they realized that while they had been silent, one woman had been their voice in the dark. Azubah was no longer the abandoned one. By royal decree, she was renamed the foundation of the house. Though she had passed away in the dark corridors of her final sacrifice, her spirit sat on the throne with her grandson. The scrolls she wrote with blood and ash became the bedrock of a national reformation. History had tried to erase her name, but the stones of Jerusalem remembered. Every time a scribe dipped his pen to record the deeds of the faithful, he remembered the queen who turned a dungeon into a library and a prison into a revolution. The light had finally returned to Judah, and it started with a single bleeding word: